Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Integral Transformative Bodywork Sunday School. I welcome all you glorious human beings out there. My name is Jeff Koshin West. My pronouns are he and him. And today, we're going to talk about the three phases of shadow relationships. So this whole month of July, we've been focusing on lectures having to do with shadow and shadow work, what that means in the collective perspective, but then also what that means from our own transformative bodyworks perspective. Shadow work is one of our foundational practices. We have two of them. Shadow work is one of our foundational practices, and witness consciousness meditation is the other foundational practice that we have. So this month we focused on shadow work because there's a whole lot of questions about that. And so we've spent these several Sundays kind of playing in that territory. This is our final Sunday in July, and we will be concluding with a conversation about the three phases of this shadow relationship. So if you have not heretofore listened to any of the other content, the other lectures, hopefully it'll still be you'll be able to track. Definitely, I would suggest watching the first offering when I basically talked about the story of the origin of shadow and what shadow work is as far as what we consider shadow work is in ITB. Of course, paying attention to the other ones are going to be helpful as well, but that first one will definitely kind of set the stage for what we're talking about as far as shadow is concerned. I am going to do a little bit of a recap today just to make sure that we have some language in place and we understand some basic concepts as we go forwards. And having a significant amount of education in shadow work is not exactly mandatory for the conversation we're having, because we do kind of talk about how this relationship does evolve and how the different phases this relationship is going to go through. So to start with, let's do a quick little recap of how shadow is made. And how shadow occurs is shadow is a natural part of the phenomenon of the human experience. It's not something, shadow is not something that one can get rid of. It's not something that one can kill off. It's not something that someone can, having some internet issues here for a second. Sorry about that. It's not something that someone can get rid of. You're never done with shadow work. So these are some misnomers that are kind of in place about shadow, and these are some ideas that we've covered in the past. When it comes to shadow, there's two primary ways that we think of it. First and foremost, shadow occurs when we disown some component of ourselves. And disown here means that we don't allow it to be a part of our humanity. We don't hold it and feel it and experience it as part of our wholeness. It's usually something that is uncomfortable for some reason or another, and we kind of want to get rid of it. We want to move past it. We want to push it out of our bodies. We want to push it out of our lives and out of our minds. We want to, hide it away somewhere, make it into a secret. We want to bury it somewhere. There's a whole lot of different ways that people kind of communicate about these things. But it's essentially any component of our wholeness that gets pushed out of our life that we don't want to pay attention to, that we want to disown. The two primary categories we find of things that get disowned, or things that are kind of included in the nature of shadow and the anatomy of shadow, is first and foremost, it's basic elements of our humanity. So the basic elements of our humanity is based off of the integral map that was popularized by Ken Wilber and that whole integral movement community. That's our basic storyline of what makes a human a human. So this is a very, very large map. It's very diverse. It's very deep. It's very complex. There's an evolutionary component to it. So we grow as human beings. We all start with certain material, certain ways of being, and that all can be modified and grown and changed and worked with. And what we find is that one major component of shadow is when a portion of that integral map, a portion of our elements as humans, is excluded, it's disowned, or it's not appreciated, or it's not included in the story of our humanity for whatever reason. It doesn't really matter what the reason is. The point is that it got disowned for some reason. So that's a major component of shadow. The other primary component of shadow is overwhelm and trauma, okay? And so how we kind of talk about trauma in ITB is anything that overwhelms the human experience or our human system. And so trauma can take on all kinds of different forms. We recognize kind of like a sliding scale of trauma. So we talk about that as like a lowercase t trauma and a capital T trauma. Capital T trauma can be major physical trauma, major psychological trauma, really intense events, things that really are life-threatening and are long periods of life-threatening experiences. Lowercase t trauma is maybe, you know, stubbing your toe, twisting an ankle, something that's significant, but also not something that defines your life and changes your body or your mind forever, okay, in a significant way. Lowercase t trauma is usually very short-lived, low amounts of pain, low amounts of agitation, and it ends usually quickly. And there's also a heightened amount of control that comes with lowercase t trauma. So one of the things that defines really intense trauma is that it's happening for a long period of time. It's extremely stimulating, meaning it's very overwhelming. And the third major thing that contributes to capital T trauma is that we're out of control. We don't have a way of mitigating the trauma or the intensity of the stimuli. We don't have a way of managing it. It's something that's occurring to us either from a person, a community, or just the environment. All right. So we recognize all these different things. And so the two primary elements of shadow that we recognize are components of the integral map that have been disowned, or trauma that has been disowned or has lacked integration. And so those are the two major categories of trauma, or of shadow, that we recognize and that we hope to connect with, create an intimate relationship with, and integrate into our normal mode of functioning on a regular basis. And so that's kind of where shadow comes from. And today we're going to really focus on kind of the integration process, the making relationship to shadow material, and what that looks like over a long period of time. Now, in the past couple lectures, we've talked about the origin of it. We've talked about, you know, a personal and collective shadow and how to do it, where it comes from and how to deal with it. We've also talked about doing actual shadow work and different voice work. And so we've kind of covered a lot of territory. And really the big story of the shadow experience is, how do we continue to make relationship with it? How do we continue to do the work? And what happens if you do that over long periods of time? And to qualify, or I should say quantify what we mean by long period of time, meaning what happens when you're doing consistent shadow work 3 years, 5 years, 9 years, 12, 15, 20 years, 30 years. What does it look like? What happens to that relationship as it evolves? Because this is relationship. This is a way of how you interact with these components of yourself, and those disowned components of yourself will show up in every relationship that you have. And that's oftentimes how we first make a relationship to those things, is everybody else kind of shows us that stuff rather than we realizing it in ourselves. And so making that relationship and what happens to that relationship over the years, over the decades, is of great importance. And also, there's not a whole lot of research on it. There's not a whole lot of story to be told about it. What I'm going to be presenting today primarily comes from the work that I've done with myself, but then also the work I've done with other people. It's hard to find kind of a lot of resources and reading and or research. It's almost impossible to find research on people doing shadow work over, 7, 10, 15, 20 years and what that looks like. So there's not a whole lot of investigation of that. Primarily, I suspect because we don't have a whole lot of attention to those things. We do look at what psychotherapy looks like over many years, if not decades, but it doesn't mean we know exactly what kind of psychotherapy they're doing. So I feel very excited about this topic because it feels like it's something that I've been able to give some voice to, and that it doesn't get a whole lot of lip service, but also is a very important relationship as well. if you do want to find some, if we do want to investigate this a little bit, probably the best domain of information that contributes to what I'm about to cover is having to do with social intelligence or emotional intelligence, having to do with the ability to include multiple perspectives into our circle of care. So if you are looking for material on that, the biggest voice in emotional intelligence and social intelligence is Daniel Goleman out of Harvard. And so he's written several books on that, and he's been looking over what social intelligence looks like as we go. And social intelligence is probably about as close as we can kind of talk about this, a close domain that we can talk about it, because it's in social intelligence, what we see is there's an evolving conversation that not only happens externally, you socialize with other people, but you also talk to yourself a fair bit. We also interact and socialize with ourselves and have a relationship with ourselves. And that line of intelligence, there's a specific line of intelligence talking that has to do with internal talk and internal self-care and self-management and whatnot. I believe that's interpersonal line of intelligence. It may be inter or it's intra. One is INTER, the other one is INTRA. Can't remember which one. I get those confused sometimes, my dyslexic brain. But one of those talks about how well we self-manage, how well we self-talk, how we do that, and how we manage that stuff, and what that experience is like for us, and how sophisticated we are with that. So that line of intelligence does fall into that social line of intelligence, because it's a conversation, it's a social experience internally. So probably the closest investigation you can make on this stuff outside of what I'm offering here at ITB is having to do with Daniel Goleman and social intelligence and the measuring of that and how that evolves, the maturation process therein. Integral community does talk about maturation a fair bit, does talk about what does it look like for our moral and ethical orientation to evolve, what does it look like from a spiritual or an enlightenment perspective, how this looks. But once again, I haven't been able to see this discovery that these three phases that I'm going to point out today. I haven't seen much of a dialogue in relationship to that. And if it has, it's been sparse, I can tell you that. So we're going to go ahead and hop into this and start talking about these three phases. And this is a very important thing, and I'm very excited to share it with you folks. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the first phase of the relationship. The first phase of the relationship is a very, very common territory. Everybody starts out at this place in some capacity or another. So the first phase is what I like to call adversarial. Now, a primary component of my assessment of someone's level of maturity or level of enlightenment or their wisdom or their capacity for deep insight or wisdom carrying and living, embodying their wisdom and embodying their enlightenment, a lot of that is based off, for me, off of their attachment to adversarial relationships. Like how do they see the relationships in their world, and how many of those relationships do they consider adversarial, meaning they are at odds with, they need to conquer that relationship, they need to win that relationship, or they have to dominate in that relationship, or the idea of the relationship is literally a winning or losing kind of a context, and it's usually very goal-oriented, having to do with gaining value, appearing valuable, and earning their right to be a human being and earning power, very power-focused type of a relationship. So in adversarial relationships, if you wander around, if a human being wanders around in adversarial relationship with the majority of things in their life, then they're going to create a whole lot of strife. There's a whole lot of suffering. There's a whole lot of fight. So you might have experienced this with certain folks. There's certain folks, it feels like any interaction is a chess game. Any interaction is a fight. Any interaction seems to be tailor-made to be a struggle and to be a negotiation and an attack type of a situation. So we want to kind of honor the reality that there are some folks, and that we have been trained that every conversation is not a sharing, but it's who's right and who's winning and who came out on top as far as that relationship was concerned, or that conversation is concerned. This is a lot of the population I have found. There's a fair bit of people that do live their lives through this lens of adversarialism, of having to win conversations, having to win life, having to win the relationship, having to stay in control of the relationship, having to have the power in the relationship. And that relationship can be anything. It doesn't have to be just a relationship to romantic partner. It can be to their family members, it can be to their peers, it can be to their coworkers. It's almost certainly is with their enemies, and it can actually be with their, their children, their family members, and their lovers. So adversarial relationships, to me, how much one invests in them, how much one decides life is in an adversarial relationship, is kind of it does tell in a very interesting story about one's maturation process and one's experience of their own wisdom and their own insight. Adversarial relationship internally, well, how it relates to shadow, is shadow material, the things that have been disowned in that person's life, basically are enemies. They're bad people. They're the bad ones. They're the evil ones. They're the bad people. They're the things you're not supposed to do. There's a lot of those categories that show up of black and white thinking of this is the right way of doing something and that's the wrong way of doing something. Those are the good people. Those are the bad people. It's oftentimes kind of a frank perspective of life. Like I said, a very black and white type of a deal. There's not a lot of gray. In fact, gray is also bad. Gray as a sign that you're not strong in your values. Gray is a sign that you're not in control. Gray is a sign of you're not in power or you're not trying to win. And this is a very common orientation with people. And so in the adversarial relationship, to start with shadow, usually shadow shows up as people they have to dominate in their environment, okay, relationships. So they may see romantic partners, they may see friendships, they may see adversaries, really, people they would consider adversaries or bad people or enemies. And also it also involves their relationship to themselves. So there's portions of themselves, you'll literally hear them talk about this, where there's portions of themselves they have to dominate. They have to hold that component of themselves at bay. They need to restrain themselves in relationship to that. And it's not like restrain yourself in the context of managing your impulsivity. It's more along the lines of emotional and psychological components inside of me are so strong, I have to fight them back. And when we talk about this in relationship to shadow material, disowned material, usually this means that if they are haunted by something that they're constantly having to fight against or constantly having to hold at bay, most of the time it's material that's portions of themselves that they're really haunted by, that they're really scared of, that they have a lot of, that they're afraid of, that they're angry with, or they're sad about, and there's really intense emotional content around that material. So oftentimes we'll see in their world, they will have very clear enemies in their world, that those are bad people and that they can do bad things to those bad people because they're the good ones. There are definitely people they have to dominate. And that culture and life is about domination. And so that means internally they will have to dominate portions of themselves. They'll have to make sure they appear in a certain way, and usually in a powerful and control-oriented type of a way, in order to make sure that they can keep control and keep power and keep in a position of manipulation and in a position of calling the shots and being in control. And shadow will start to show up in those relationships. So in an adversarial, for a person who's got an adversarial relationship with their shadow, oftentimes you'll see a lot of self-sabotage. You'll see a lot of situations where they set themselves up to fail. You'll see a lot of situations where they will be performing, they will be surprised that obvious debacles occur. They will be surprised that just because they fixed a problem one day or fixed an issue one day or were able to hold off or control something one day, that thing came back. They'll be oftentimes surprised that quote unquote fixing something in one situation doesn't result in it always being fixed. So oftentimes, once again, a black and white type of a perspective where their perspective of reality just is machine-like and kind of mechanical and kind of an immature type of irrational that, like I said, if I've done something before, I shouldn't have to do it again. And so it can be kind of that, once again, this is an adversarial type of a perspective where everything is a fight, everything is a challenge, everything is something, every relationship is a situation to dominate and to win. And this can be really, really dangerous. Ways that shadow show up for them is, once again, in their relationships, they will see people as being devious. They will see people as trying to manipulate them. They will see people as trying to conquer them. They will see people as trying to expose their weakness. And they will oftentimes be very, very attached to certain groups very much being after them. And they have to be on their guard, and they have to be ready to fight for themselves and win in order to keep their way of life in function. So this is a very broad portion of the population. There's a lot of folks who have just a real shit relationship to their shadow, and they really do believe that these relationships, that everybody's an adversary until they prove their trust, and not even then are they going to be trustworthy. Okay. They also will be haunted by memories. They'll have a hard time reconciling and feeling the things that make them feel uncomfortable, make them feel weak. Shadow shows up to them oftentimes in dreams. They have recurring nightmares. Oftentimes they have secret anxieties and secret depressions. Secret, real dangerous secret psychological agitations that we don't talk about because it's going to make me look unsafe. It's going to make me look weak. It's going to make me look out of control. And so in adversarial relationships in this first phase, shadow is monsters in their life. Shadow are big dragons they have to slay. Shadow is it's a unending constant war that has to be fought, and they have to win. And it's a very, very kind of us and them type of an orientation. And the adversarial relationship is usually pits the person who is seeing the world as the good guy and the hero and the one that's going to win, and has the righteousness to win, the righteousness to lead, the righteousness to dominate and control. And they rarely have the skill sets to reflect upon their actions. They rarely have the skill sets to listen and look at what's going on inside of them and what's alive inside of them. We see a number of lines of intelligence that are just kind of, they stopped growing, they stopped maturing at a relatively young age. And those lines of intelligence are oftentimes, the care and concern line of intelligence, the social lines of intelligence, oftentimes the ethical lines of intelligence, and other lines of intelligence were given permission to grow, but those were not quite, because those would have made us vulnerable. And in the adversarial relationship, the worst thing you can be is vulnerable. The worst thing you can be is wide open. The worst thing you can be is unguarded. And so this is very contrary to doing shadow work, and engaging with shadow is very contrary to the adversarial person, in phase one adversarial relationship with themselves and with life and with shadow. So that phase is very fraught, as you can probably imagine. It's fraught with trouble. And the hard part with the phase one, the real difficult scenario with phase one is, like I touched on, the phase one is hardcore, just really disinterested in anything that's going to make them feel afraid, sad, angry. It's going to make them feel vulnerable, and it's going to make them feel like they're out of control. They're very concerned about anything that's going to make them feel less than powerful, or if they're going to feel incapable or unprepared. They have a really hard time with feeling those things. And guess what happens when you start doing shadow work? When you start doing shadow work, the first thing you notice is, holy shit, I feel all these scary feelings I'm not ready to feel. I don't want to feel. I've worked really hard to build my life. For the adversarial mind, the idea is I built my life in a way to avoid feeling XYZ emotions, XYZ experiences. And so why would I start doing something to face those things, to turn towards them? So their perception of a successful life is to build a life that avoids those things. And there's a partial truth to that, but the downside of that is portions of themselves go into that field. That means that they're the one feeling things. They're the one with the experiences, which means they're rejecting and cutting off portions of their body, portions of their life, portions of their psyche. And that's where the rub is, because that creates some pretty serious psychosis as well as physical problems as well. And so the hardest sell of shadow work comes at this phase. The most difficult thing to do, or the most difficult phase of these groups to negotiate with to do shadow work, is the fucking phase 1 people, because you're asking them to do the most contrary thing that they could think of, which is sit down, shut up, and feel what a deplorable human being you are, how intensely afraid you are, how incredibly angry and enraged you are, how disgusted you are, and how incredibly deeply sad and wounded and disappointed and brokenhearted you are. To the adversarial mind, to this phase 1 mind, there's no goodness in feeling those things. There's nothing that could possibly be good about feeling those things. But the reality is that we find out that that's actually where all the goodness is. That's actually where all the gold is at, is facing those disowned components of themselves. And I want to be really clear with this along the way as we talk about shadow. I've run into some folks, and this is not in this phase, but the second phase, this happens a lot. But I'm going to talk about it here because it also comes up in phase 1 folks. Phase 1 folks and phase 2 folks, they usually say, you know, I have a high pain threshold or something like that. They say, oh man, I can really, you know, the sad stuff, the difficult stuff, the gross stuff, the underbelly of my soul, the underbelly of my consciousness. Yeah, I'm totally for that. And what I've noticed along the way is that there is real truth to this. They are being sincere. But what shadow work does is real shadow work, and the real, when you're doing shadow work on a regular basis, what happens is you're not just revisiting the same things, the same pains over and over and over again. You're not just going back to the hole you dug and saying, oh, I dug this hole, this is what it's like to be in it, and that's that. You never stop digging in actual real long-term shadow work. You never stop digging. So that means you never stop discovering, which means you never are in, the idea is not to be in the same place all the time when you do shadow work. The idea is to progress with your shadow work, which means the surprise of new pain, the surprise of new sadness, the surprise of new horror and rage. So it's not about if you're good at taking pain, or if you're comfortable, or you're, you know, if sorrow is a friend, or if death is a friend, or you've quote unquote had plenty of dark nights. That's not really what we want to get hung up on, because this means that you're used to exploring the same type of pain. You're used to exploring the same type of shadow. You're maybe used to exploring the same type of discomfort. And we want to remember that that's great. That's good. We want to honor whatever shadow work you can fucking do. And we want to be really grateful for any kind of grit and fortitude and or willpower that you have in the face of these uncomfortable experiences. We want to honor those 100%. But we also want to remember that in the ongoing story and the maturation of our relationship to shadow, you're consistently discovering new stuff. You don't just look at the same, turn over the same stones over and over again. You're consistently growing into new territory of shadow material. And when you're consistently growing into new territory of shadow, you're bumping into scary stuff. You're bumping into possibly horrifying discoveries. You're bumping into terrible realizations at times. You're bumping into just all kinds of different flavors of heartbrokenness. And so as we do shadow work, we kind of keep that idea in mind. It's good to honor yourself, and it's good to celebrate the work you're doing 100%. But we got to be really careful of like over congratulating ourselves that, oh man, I had this dark night of the soul and I survived it, and oh, I'm doing so great. This is not a survival spell. Sorry about that, folks. All right. That's a surprise. I haven't seen that in a while. All right. I have to do some editing on that one. All right, I'm going to try and recap some of this stuff. It just started recording right away, so I'll have to do some editing later. Okay. So what I hope to be picking up with from where we left off from the drop is the idea that we do want to keep in mind that as we're doing this work, we want to remember that it's not just about turning over old stones. It's not just about doing the usual stuff that we've done. It's not just about being overly congratulatory to ourselves for doing this work and returning to these things over and over again. The real ideal we want to keep in mind when we're doing, especially long-term shadow, is continuing to push at the edges a little bit and explore new territory with old shadow material. So a quick example of this is if you have some shadow material or some trauma that you've had with a family member, let's just say it's a mother. Maybe you have some trauma with your mother, you have some shadow work, and your mother wasn't very supportive of your inclusiveness as a human being. You can do that shadow work for a period of time. And if you spend maybe, let's say, what's a long time for some people is about 2 years working this angle, you may feel really complete after 2 years of working your mother issues. And that can be very true for that period of your life. But what we submit in this conversation of these different phases and this evolution of these phases, what we submit is that as you age, it is also your responsibility to look into that as you age. So those 2 years were great. Those 2 years set up a really beautiful foundational type of a situation. But that doesn't mean you're done. You're never done with shadow, because as you go from, let's say you did those 2 years in your early 20s, as you hit your late 20s and your early 30s, you're going to be a different fucking human being, which means you're going to see that shadow relationship with your mother in a different type, through a different type of a lens. And this is where we see the evolution of the relationship get really exciting, because you could have turned over that mother issue conversation, let's say just 1,000 times. And on the 1,001st time, you can then be like, oh, wow, I just pushed into some new territory because I am older, I am more mature, I'm having more life experience, and I just caught a new wisp of some new gold. I found some new information, some new medicine to deepen and enliven that storyline and integrate that hurt and integrate those components of myself into that relationship. And this is where we start to see this next phase of the 3 phases. And so moving from the adversarial relationship, the hope is that we convince the adversarial mind, the phase 1 mind, we convince them, or they have irrefutable data, or what more commonly occurs is they're in such intense pain, they start to self-reflect. So for whatever reason, they start to self-reflect, they start to look inwardly, they start to consider themselves and start to look at their behavior and start to inquire why they do things. And like I said, that's either inspired by someone they love, they're presented with irrefutable data, and then they're able to then perform. I'm getting some glitchiness again, sorry. Okay. They have irrefutable data and they are willing to go forwards with it, or the pain is so significant they cannot not look at what's going on in their life. So this is a place where usually phase 1 goes into phase 2. And in phase 2, it's what I like to call the title that we usually use is maintenance. But the best answer for this one, it's like a dirty bathroom. The analogy I like to use is like a bathroom. If you're living in a home and there's a bathroom, you got to clean your bathroom on a regular basis. You clean your body in there, you pee and poop in there, you process stuff, you practice hygiene in there, hopefully. The bathroom gets wear and tear on some of the less attractive things that humans do for some people. And so it's important for us to maintain that bathroom, to keep that bathroom clean. It's not only important for our own health, because if we keep a clean bathroom, especially if we regularly clean our bathroom, then it's not a whole lot of work. You know, it's something we become familiar with. We probably have a routine with it. It also keeps us healthy because it decreases the amount of problematic bacteria, staph, other things that might live in those spaces. And it decreases the probability of us getting sick from our own funk, our own filth. So the analogy fits there, but then it also fits if you actually have people come over to your house. You know, if you have people come over to your house, you don't want them to go into your bathroom with all this filth if you haven't cleaned your bathroom in a long time. You know, they don't want to walk into the bathroom seeing this piss and shit and hair and all this other stuff lying around in this bathroom. And then you're like, yeah, enjoy your bathroom experience in my home. This is all my piss and shit. Enjoy. So we're not interested in doing that. So what we realize is also cleaning your bathroom on a regular basis allows for people to move in and out of your space without getting a lot of your shit on them, okay? Without getting a lot of your funk on them. So doing regular shadow work, this process of regular self-care, it's oftentimes, I have found, the adversarial mind still persists. So it's looking at the bathroom and it's looking at the bathroom of like, God, I don't like cleaning my bathroom. It's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's not something I'm interested in doing. I sometimes may create, you know, scenarios in my head, create reasons why I shouldn't clean the bathroom today or this week or this month. And so we do come up with rationalizations to not clean the bathroom. We come up with different ideas and beliefs and perceptions that we shouldn't clean the bathroom, or cleaning the bathroom is a problem. And we have these different perceptions about cleaning the bathroom. And that's the idea, is to keep in mind that we see this situation as still adversarial. We still are like, oh, fuck, I don't want to clean the bathroom type of a thing. And so we keep that type of relationship with our shadow. It's that still kind of an adversarial relationship that's defined as, this is a dirty job. I guess I'll do it, but I don't like it. I still don't enjoy feeling uncomfortable. I mean, this is all my funk, but it's still not something I'm super excited about. It's still not something that I'm like, you know, just chomping at the bit to go clean the bathroom. And so this is the remnants of the adversarial relationship still remains. It's still in place, and there may be less of an understanding of how much that filth influences their own life and the relationship. So we can also use an analogy of a messy room or a messy kitchen or a messy household or something along those lines, where there's just, you can't move through it very easily. And there's plenty of science that talks about clean spaces actually supports mental health in a lot of ways. Organized minds, organized experience, organized rooms actually decrease stress for the majority of the population, which means that there's definitely components of us as human beings that feel more comfortable in spaces that are ordered. It decreases the stress experience in areas that are ordered. And for whatever reason, there's a suggestion, and there seems to be some research that suggests that creating an ordered territory, even if it looks like a mess to other people, having order within that mess, what may be perceived as a mess as other people, there's still order to it. And that order can be a representative of the mind and can be a representative of what's happening with our experience of our psyche. So the idea at phase 2 is a person that understands they have baggage. They understand they have trauma. They understand that trauma and that baggage, and they have experience with that trauma and that baggage, that shadow material, getting in the way of successful relationships, and not just romantic ones. It may be successful professional relationships. It may be a successful relationship to their doer inside of themselves. So it's a person that definitely does see the value of working with their trauma and their baggage and their shadow. They understand it. They know that it's true, but they are still having to push themselves or build the momentum or enlist other people to support them in their momentum in order to go to shadow work on a regular basis, especially the shadow work that we're talking about that's quote unquote the real shadow work, the real work, which is going to maybe old stories and unearthing new territory, pushing into new aspects and making new realizations on a regular basis. So for the phase 2 folks, they usually look pretty functional for a lot of folks. The adversarial relationship is medium to low. So they're still probably a little edgy about it. They're still probably a little cranky about having to clean the bathroom, but they also recognize that it's also, you know, their responsibility, you know, if they respect themselves, and they, of course, if they, and moreover, if they respect their friends and family and lovers, they should clean their bathroom when their friends come over. So it's one of those things where they do understand the value of it, but they're still struggling with a little bit of tension, medium to low amounts of tension. The folks who have low amounts of tension in relationship to shadow, they're kind of hard to see at times, to see that they still have that low level of tension, because they usually can pay pretty good lip service, and they have done a fair bit of investigation of their shadow material. And that's great. We don't, I'm not meaning to poo-poo on them or poo-poo on anybody, quite honestly, who's attempting this process. But what I'm hoping to point out is that the farther you kind of go through this arc, the more complex it can get about how you, or how we as human beings, how we sidestep some of the responsibility and the great joy of discovering, and the great curiosity of discovering, and the gold that comes with the more we sidestep doing the work in order to retrieve the gold. So if you are listening to this process and you're wondering, where do I fit in? You may fit into, you know, you may find that you've done some shadow work. You may find that you're experienced in it. You may find that you're, you know, you've done some good work. You've done some of those powerful things. You have made great insights. You have evolved, and you have changed your relationships to make them deeper and juicier and fuller and different things along those lines. And when there is success in human beings, what we find is a little bit of a decrease of commitment. So this is where it gets a little bit sticky for phase 2 people who are experiencing a low amount of tension in relationship to shadow work and shadow material. What we notice out of their behavior is maybe they do less writing this stuff down. They do less reaching out and covering shadow material with other people. They decrease their commitment to showing up to other, to maybe their therapist or counselor or coach to work some of these materials. They oftentimes consider shadow work more of a head activity. It's something that they spend a lot of time maybe thinking about or feeling into, but they don't actually sit down and do some of the other work of it, of the embodying things, or they don't do the actual writing things out and re-examination. Shadow work is, like I said, it's a thing to get done. It's a box to tick. It's a thing to cross off the list so they can qualify themselves as a good person, and that we can feel fulfilled, and that we can feel complete, that we can feel like we've done the work. And once again, these things aren't bad things. These aren't a horrible way of, you're not a you know, a shitbag of a person because you're thinking in this way. It just is a sign of still remnants of a certain adversarial relationship, because I'm still seeing shadow as something to solve. If I'm looking at shadow as this thing to do to cross off the list, and then I'm going to be okay, I'm still having kind of a adversarial relationship of something I have to get done in order to be okay. I have to get done in order to still remain in control of my life, and to still have some power over this shadow experience. And once again, this isn't 100% inappropriate. You may have to live in this land. God knows I lived in that land for a very long time, and I still have to remind myself to make sure I don't live in that land. Sorry, I'm getting internet connection instability again. I'll wait for that to go off the screen. Excellent, there we go. So I still live in that experience of struggling, of making sure to watch myself to see that I'm not just going to my shadow practice as a box to tick or a thing to cross off, and I'm still not looking to overpower my shadow material. We want to remain responsible to how that behavior comes out in the world, but to shadow itself, I don't want to create an adversarial relationship with myself. I don't want to uphold that. So you still have to kind of keep in mind or task yourself with staying responsible to your process as you evolve as a human being doing shadow work. But what we can tell you is that this phase does end at some point in time. There's not a clear gate. There's not a clear ending of it. Like there is kind of from phase 1 to phase 2. Phase 2, there's enough pain that occurs. There's a breakdown, and then there's usually a breakthrough. So shit gets agitating enough to where the person has to break through and or breaks down. And so that happens in phase 1, phase 1 to phase 2, phase 2 to phase 3. Phase 2 can be a slog because you can be very successful, you can be very functional, you can feel like you're really fulfilling your responsibility as a healthy adult human being. You can feel like you've with the success that you experience and that you're enjoying, you can feel like you're kind of in a kind of a doneness type of an experience. And once again, these are signs and symptoms that we don't quite understand deeply enough what's actually going on with shadow material. The transition from phase 2 to phase 3 is very difficult to do on our own. Usually the best idea is to enlist other people that you trust with yourself with this type of material. Usually that needs to take the form of a counselor or a coach or someone that understands what shadow is and can hold you accountable for times when you are taking the success as a sign that there's no more things to gather from shadow work. And so this is, like I said, this is a difficult time, and it is sometimes very difficult to see how you are sidestepping that responsibility because, like I said, you're most likely successful. You're most likely doing well. But it is worthwhile to continue to look into that direction and continue to investigate how you might be sidestepping that experience. And one of the tests along the way is something we touched on a little bit earlier. One of the tests are how often are you going to your shadow work practice, and looking when going to it. How often are you documenting that? How much are you embodying of that? Are you only sticking to one portion of the 3-2-1, the 3-2-1-0 process that we've suggested? Are you doing half or only a certain portion of the shadow practice that you have? 2, are you discovering new stuff? That's really an important type of a situation. Are you consistently pushing into new territory and finding deeper realizations of stuff? The other exciting way that you can the other way you can have some accountability is actually in your friendships and romantic relationships. If you are in a romantic relationship, friendships work sometimes, romantic relationships are better. Relationships with an irritating parent, sibling, or caretaking children will reveal that stuff even more. So it's one of those deals where these types of practices can be helpful for showing where you're missing certain perceptions, where you're missing certain information. So if you're noticing, say you have a romantic relationship, if you're noticing the same type of conversation coming up and the same type of problem showing up in the relationship, this is a sure sign that there does need to be shadow work aimed in that direction. And that may be some great material to kind of juxtaposition and put into relationship with your history of material. And so we hope that phase 2 to phase 3, we hope that we are meticulous enough and observant enough and enlist other partners in this process enough to where we start to see the revelation of things not working out, the revelation of maybe where we've hit that we're still locked in an adversarial relationship. How do I still want to dominate my relationships and myself? Are there parts of me that I'm still looking to dominate? Are there still parts of me that I'm still wanting to completely control? Are there still portions of myself that I feel like I have to fend off and what does that look like? So as we go from phase 2 to phase 3, we start to see, if you spend enough time asking that question and truly investigating that with the help of support, what you start to notice is you'll start to notice that you start to get excited about uncomfortable things. All right. You start to get attracted. You start to get deeply curious. You start to get motivated to explore a pain experience. You start to get excited about exploring scary territory that you've never been in before. You start to move it. You start to notice that your system will get excited that something is arising inside of you that you're not sure what it is. And it may be heartbreaking, it may be terrifying, it may be enraging, it may be deeply sorrowful, but you're feeling that. And instead of turning away from it, you're sitting with it, and in a moment of interaction, you're feeling it and you're having that experience, and you're creating enough space for you to carry on the interaction, but then also feel those things, and even hit the pause button for a second on the conversation to let that come through. So one of the best ways to kind of illustrate what that third phase looks like, one of the best ways to illustrate it is to kind of talk about what it looks like when you're having maybe a heated discussion or a confusion between you and a friend, you and a lover, you and a family member. And so what this means is that maybe there's a confusion and you're having this confusion with this person. Maybe it's your romantic partner. And as we're talking, me and my romantic partner, we're kind of going through this stuff. Maybe it's a hard topic. Maybe we're just trying to figure out what each other's experience is. And as we're going, I feel this new sensation come up, this experience of maybe deep sadness. And as this deep sadness and heartache come up, we're having a conversation about the topic, and I can talk to my partner and say, hold on a second, let's just kind of pause for a second. I have this stuff coming up. There's this voice inside of me that's talking about this type of pain, this flavor of pain. And I'm wondering how it can relate to that. And you and your partner you two listen to that pain, and you get a feel for what that pain is about, and you see how that pain relates to the topic of conversation. Now, it may relate big to the topic of conversation, or it may just be that the topic of conversation brought up this new element for you to discover and talk about later that has little to do with the actual topic. It just has a slight relationship, and it has a whole different component to itself. But this is kind of what we mean, is that as that arises, my awareness and my heart remains open. My awareness and my heart and my interest remains open and receptive to what's arising. And I can carry kind of 2 heavy stimuli or 3 or 4 heavy stimuli all at once. So I don't have to abandon the actual conversation I'm having with my romantic partner. I can include it into the storyline. And if it contributes to our conversation with my romantic partner, my lover, then great. If it doesn't, we can both kind of come to that conclusion. I can out myself and reveal that part of myself. And I can say, all right, well, that's something that's cool that got brought up. Thank you, Shadow, for doing that. That's beautiful. I'm glad. I'm so appreciative that my shadow was able to show me this material that's coming up with this stuff, and oh, what a juicy opportunity this is to investigate this more. And that's kind of what we hope occurs, is that we become more and more excited and attracted to and motivated from a heart center space to actually discover that which may be qualified by many people to be terrible and shitty and uncomfortable. So one of my teachers I've talked about before on here, Jumpo Dennis Kelly from Mondo Zen, very charismatic kind of a teacher. And he always talked about doing this type of stuff as like, somebody just shit on my plate. Oh boy, there's shit on my plate. Let me pick up that shit and smell it. Oh wow, what a smell this is. Oh wow, what a powerful thing. So let me taste this shit. Oh wow, this shit tastes amazing. Wow, I wasn't expecting those flavors whatsoever. So he does this really sweet kind of theatricality that goes along with it. And that's kind of the mind we're hoping to harness along the way. That's kind of the heart and the awareness and the perspective and the lens we're hoping to cultivate along the way. is this deep openness, this deep willingness to be receptive to that which is arising, even if that which is arising is a total shit show. It's a horrible, horrible feeling, sensation, debacle in a relationship. Even if it's that, we're still, you know, on edge, wanting to see it, wanting to understand, wanting to hear it, wanting to love it, and making space for that and honoring that as part of our experience, as part of reality arising. So in phase 3, what we really start to see is maybe not, we can't be as bold as saying the end of the adversarial relationship, although, man, I really wish we could say that. But it's very much a very deep dropping of the adversarial relationship. And if phase 2 would be considered maintenance or keeping a clean bathroom, phase 3 would be considered partnership. This is shadow becomes your greatest partner, interpersonal partner. Shadow becomes this beautiful guide in revealing that which you didn't see. Shadow becomes this really sweet, juicy relationship that reminds you of all the stuff that maybe got disowned, all the stuff that you still haven't brought home, all the parts of yourself or all the traumatized aspects of self that you still haven't let into the fire of the heart. And let be warmed by the fire of your heart. Let be warmed by the fire of your love. Let them be warmed by the intention and awareness of compassion from awareness. And it just consistently reminds us of those. It reveals things to us. It's a great partnership in sharing insight. It's a great partnership in integrating our traumas, integrating our injuries. It's a great partner in revealing how we push away or we hold life at a certain distance, and that we can actually let life in, that we can actually let love into our lives. And so shadow in the third phase really is about that relationship becoming this really sweet, juicy partnership of retrieving and unveiling the beauty that your life has been. And when we say the beauty that your life has been, we mean the beauty of its totality. So not just the things, not just the beauty of life being the things that you really like, your victories, your insights, how you won, how you achieved, how you pushed through, how you achieved a goal or were successful. That's only part of your existence. That's only part of your life. But the third phase shadow person sees great joy in being really close to the heartache and the different experiences and the losses, and holding them as dearly and sweetly and in love as the so-called successful things. So what we notice along the way as phase 3 shadow really kicks into place, another signifier here of success, is that our psychological orientation to thoughts, emotions, experiences, and pain and trauma and different things along those lines, our philosophical orientation, our lens that we look through, has gone through some fundamental shifts. Okay, so we no longer identify ourselves as being successful people or spiritual people or good people or healthy people. We no longer identify ourselves as those things based off of whether we feel good or not, or whether we're healthy or not, we're physically healthy or not, or whether we have a certain level of success. So what we think in a very special way, in a unique way, and have all these thoughts and have all these ideas and have all this information. Or I feel really a whole bunch of stuff. I have incredible amounts of emotions. I have all these different emotions all the time. My internet's going a little bit funky again. 1 second. Cool. So we no longer identify as the mind emotion, the mental emotional construct that is our psychology. We no longer identify the personality as who we are. And so we start to identify as awareness. And so this is why, once again, in ITB, the foundational practices are witness consciousness meditation and shadow work. Shadow work on its own doesn't work to create enlightenment that we're talking about. Neither does witness consciousness on its own provide what shadow work can do. So what we're hoping to do is combining these two of shadow work and witness consciousness creates an opportunity for us to not only reveal these deep, deep, deep secrets in our life, but then also it teaches us through the witness consciousness meditation, it teaches us to identify as awareness in a human body watching the existence occur. And so what culminates over the years as doing this type of meditation and shadow work together is we start to become very, 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 very excited about being aware and awake to the full spectrum of our humanity. And this creates not only something that one could call enlightenment, but it also creates what we oftentimes call as recovery. We use the term full recovery in ITB, capital F, capital R, full recovery, because this is a much more whole human type of recovery and integration. And so when we do enough meditation, when we witness consciousness meditation and enough shadow work, what we start to notice is that they start to work off each other and they start to deepen each other, in fact. So I start to identify through that witness consciousness meditation, as I'm moving into phase 3, what I notice is that I'm really stabilizing as just this witness, as just awareness, being present to what's arising in this human experience. And I don't pick up one emotional experience or physical experience or life experience and hold it next to another and rate it. I just hold it together and honor it. And it's all welcome in the heart. It's all welcome in awareness. It's not even, but it's all welcome here. Okay. So everything gets love. Everything is loved. Everything is welcome here. And so in the third phase of that shadow practice, of this shadow relationship, we start to see a culmination of the several years, if not decades, of witness consciousness meditation, shadow work starting to really reveal itself, where in the witness consciousness experience, in the phase 3 experience, we start to see just this real a deep appreciation for all the different types of juiciness that are arising, whether it be shitty, whether it be pleasant, whether it be joyous, whether it be just kind of chill and calm and peaceful. All of it is welcome, and all of it is kind of held in honor and esteemed as this is part of the experience arising. And so in the phase 3 shadow hardly even looks like it used to in phase 1, because shadow is like this deep, deep, sweet partner of yours, this internal experience that is as beautiful as and creates the sensation of fulfillment that's extremely similar to feeling deep love, deep gratification, deep acceptance, deep belonging within our own human body and our own skin. And so there's actually, in phase 3, there's a lot of gratitude and a lot of joy that comes from just being with shadow, just having that experience and kind of just going through that relationship. And that's kind of how those phases unfold. And that's kind of where we stand as far as what we've noticed about these 3 phases are concerned. They're not simple. They're not easy. They're not rungs in a ladder. They're not steps in a staircase. They overlap each other a fair bit, but they're quite clear when they start to unfold. And the nature of life changes with each specific phase. Other things to know about these phases is that you can't cheat any of them. You can't speed any of it up. So this is kind of difficult. Like for the phase 2 spaces, phase 2 people really, really want to push really hard and do a bunch of shadow work in order to get to the next phase. And so we kind of have to remember that it's not about doing more shadow work. It's about doing consistent shadow work. It's also about doing consistent shadow work that leaves the door open for new discoveries. And that has to be over a certain period of years. I'm not trying to suggest that this is how it must be, but all the evidence so far points to the fact that it seems to take several years of practice in each of the phases for it to kind of for them to unfold this way. So we've had I've mentored a lot of people, and I've mentored several people who have taken the long haul, who have been working with me for 8-10 years, and literally they've been spending the majority of that time in phase 2 and they are having experiences that are just now starting to look like phase 3 type stuff. So we don't want to polish this and say, hey, if you work really hard, you'll get to phase 3 faster. That doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be this thing that kind of unfolds in its own time with each person. Some people move into these spaces a little bit faster than others. And fast, I want to carry that word very gently because fast is kind of a shitty phrase of time and space. But nevertheless, the idea is my hope is to make sure that we understand that we do want to pay attention to just doing the work and doing the work well, rather than putting a time frame on it or looking for that phase 3 goal and staying in that adversarial, that very light, very subtle adversarial relationship of, oh, I crossed that off my list, now I'm in phase 3, or I checked that box enough times to where I'm now in phase 3 space. And so it doesn't seem to work that way. And there's also, depending on you having a rough day, you not having enough food, you not getting enough rest, you being under too much stress, there's no reason why you can't start experiencing some of phase 1, phase 2 types of symptoms in your life. That's a real thing too. And I can tell you from personal experience, being in self-assessing and having some others support these findings, being in a phase 2 to 3 relationship myself with my shadow material. At phase 3, you still are getting nightmares. You still get shadow that shows up in your dreams that is knocking on your door. And that doesn't mean you're going back to phase 1. It simply means that in the work that you're doing, it means that there's still big discoveries on the way. And that can be very exciting. I mean, when I have nightmares, I'm like, God, this is so cool. I just had this really intense freaking nightmare. It really might have, I'm not trying to say that I make it into a positive situation. It's more along the lines of, holy shit, that shook me up. And that really, really agitated me. That brought up some new emotions and some new experiences that I have maybe heretofore not really experienced all that much. So there is the reality of the being shaken up and whatever kind of uncomfortable sensations came up for that emotion, but also just next to it is this awareness of, ooh, holy shit, what a cool thing that I just had this really fucking wild nightmare. Wow, look at this. My body, I just can't go back to sleep because my mind is obsessing in this certain direction. What a cool thing. I'm really looking forward to unpacking this experience. So this is what we kind of hope we arrive at, is not this, we hope that we arrive at this place where when the new discoveries surface, when there's something inside of us that arises that we are totally unfamiliar with, and that all of our training has suggested that we turn away for, that we control it, and that we turn away from it, or we bypass it, we only focus on something good. When we have all that training, that new thing shows up that we've never experienced before and that we may be terrified of feeling, we stay and we listen and we remain open-hearted in the face of it, and we see what it becomes. We see what it shows us. We remain clean, clear, and curious with what is going to unfold. What the fuck am I going to discover about myself now? What fucking horror show am I going to come to realize now? And so this is what we find. This is a part of this second to third phase relationship and third phase relationship symptoms of this deep, deep curiosity of, what am I going to discover in myself? What am I going to find? And the beauty of this, I can also share both from a personal experience and also working with other people. The beauty of this is that it just enriches life for you. It will suck sometimes, 100%. It will be a painful experience at times, sure. but it deepens and enriches life in a new way. It can change fundamentally relationships that you have, because it's fundamentally changing you. And it's fundamentally changing how you show up in the world and how you relate to that which is uncomfortable, that which is difficult. And so there's definite worth in investing into this stuff, in doing a long-term investment. And this type of thing that happens is very much why I continue to work so hard with ITB, is because what I find in the environment the most with working with clients and just looking at the world as it is, the majority of the population's problems are exactly this. It's shadow material, and it's what phase of the shadow relationship that they're in that is their primary issue, and that there just isn't enough education and guidance in how to navigate the phases of these relationships. This shit is difficult to unravel on your own. Like I said, there's very few resources talking about this type of arc of a relationship. And if they're out there and you know about them, please let me know, because I would love to hear other people's discoveries in this territory. But nevertheless, these are hard to navigate. And if you don't have a team, it's even harder. I mean, I know I've slogged through some territory in that second phase that, I swear to God, if I had some help, if I had some people who had some experience in this stuff, I wouldn't have to bang my head against the wall for so very long. So it is a difficult process, but it is a difficult process that's worthy. And if we're able to share and educate on it a little bit, it decreases the intense suffering and collateral damage that can sometimes come along with it when we don't have any education in the situation or experience or support. So whether you consider yourself a beginner of the personal transformation process or a veteran, this type of work, this type of conversation is a very helpful one, because it does remind us of the inevitability that we are all still discovering. We are all still figuring out what the hell is going on. We are still all realizing who we are on a regular basis and figuring out then how to embody it. So this is a really beautiful way of keeping us humble. This is a really beautiful way of keeping us in our humanity. And this is a really beautiful way of keeping us open to connect with our hearts and focus on understanding each other, rather than trying to dominate each other, or trying to control each other, or trying to overwhelm someone else and win the relationship instead of be in the relationship. So we're going to open up some space for some questions if anybody has any. I'm just going to kind of pause for just a second here. All right. What I'm going to now go into is I'm going to go ahead and say goodbye. Thank you very much for your time spending with us. This is the conclusion of July shadow time, but we will always revisit on these Sunday schools. We'll always be revisiting shadow, because like I said, one of our foundational practices is the shadow work. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for participating. If you want to donate to us, go to PayPal or Venmo. For PayPal, you can look up Integral Transformative Bodywork. You'll find us there. Or, I'm sorry, Embodying ITB on PayPal. And on Venmo, it's Jeffrey West 6. It's easy to find there as well. Please donate if you can. You don't have to, obviously, but if you love what they're doing here, all that revenue goes to ITB and supports these types of programs. If you like what you see here, make sure to like our page, ring that little bell and like our page. Please feel free to include any kind of comments to these videos. Please share these videos as much as you want with other folks. And if there are any kind of topics you'd love to hear about on Sunday school having to do with ITB or your own or different schools of thought with personal transformation and spirituality, please, please, please don't hesitate to let me know. Yeah, so thank you very much. Thanks for participating. And I will definitely, we'll see you next time, next Sunday, okay? All right, take care.